Radagon is Marika. How can that be? What does it even mean? I think it all began with the Liurnian Wars. Radagon was always Marika, and only became less so over time. Let's start with a broad stroke story of Radagon, at least before the Shattering. He's first mentioned as the champion leading Leyndell's charge against Liurnia. The Liurnian Wars end when Radagon marries the Carian queen Rennala. Radagon then learns a bunch of sorcery and has 3 kids with Rennala. Then, for unknown reasons, he leaves Rennala and becomes the second Elden Lord to Marika, effectively replacing Godfrey. In this role, he develops Golden Order fundamentalism. Lots of interesting things happen to him even after that, but I want to focus on his earlier history for now. Let me begin my theorizing by stating that I believe it was always Marika's intention to plunder the intellectual secrets of Liurnia and incorporate that knowledge into her domain. The Liurnian Wars were never intended to succeed militarily. I think she was probably inspired to do this based on the result of the earlier dragon invasion. Dragons attacked Leyndell and were repelled, but rather than exterminating their enemies like they had done in the past, Leyndell befriended the dragons. One result of this was various dragon incantations empowering Leyndell's military. This demonstrated that incorporating an enemy's accomplishments could be wiser than destroying them outright. So Marika wanted to gain the various sorcerous knowledge built up in Liurnia. The Echo of Marika at the Minor Erdtree Church says, "I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order. Through understanding of the proper way, our faith, our grace, is increased." Radagon was always supposed to marry Rennala. He was always supposed to learn all he could of sorcery and then return to Leyndell. He could then take that scholarly approach to magic and apply it to the Golden Order. This is the searching, the understanding, that Marika was talking about. One detail I find very interesting is that there were 2 Liurnian Wars. Why is that? I think the first war was mainly intended to show Radagon off and put some pressure on Liurnia. According to the Carian Knight's Sword item description, the Carian forces were able to fend off the Leyndell incursion despite presumably being completely outnumbered. It seems the first war wasn't very successful for Leyndell, hence the need for a second, but I find this hard to believe. Considering their track record, I think it makes more sense if the Leyndell forces were pulling their punches, not legitimately outclassed. I think it's also important to ask, where is Godfrey during all this? In the past he had been the one leading the troops in the field. His crown was warranted with strength. At least after the first war effort fell through, you'd think he would lead the second. But no, it's all on the shoulders of this currently no-name champion. So I think the first war was a show of force from Leyndell, but one in which they did not push their advantage. They're not actually trying to conquer Liurnia after all. The second war was more forceful and served as Leyndell's ultimatum, forcing Liurnia to decide how to resolve this conflict. Queen Rennala went with the option that she had been manipulated towards all along, marrying Radagon. Miriel wonders why a mere champion would become Elden Lord, but I would similarly ask why the marriage of a mere champion would decide the outcome of a war. I don't think the defection of one general is going to completely alter Leyndell's foreign policy. Rather, I think this was always the intended outcome. Not only that, but I believe Radagon was always Marika herself, in a magical disguise. The Mimic Veil item description says it was also called Marika's Mischief, showing that this kind of trickery is well in her wheelhouse. In fact, I'd say she designed Radagon specifically to appear attractive to Rennala. My speculation here is a bit funky, I make no bones about that, so be warned. But it is fun. Much is made of Radagon's red hair. It's said he despises it. If he's Marika, it makes sense. This reminds her of her bitter old enemy, the Fire Giants. But the same quality is what she needs to appeal to Rennala. From the Sword of Night and Flame item description, we learn that the astrologers and the Fire Giants used to be neighbors. Rennala may have been an astrologer herself, or at least belongs to a culture that descended from theirs. Rennala and her Carians seem matrilineal, what with all their focus on queens and princesses. So I speculate that women among the astrologers were considered a feminine ideal in old mountaintop culture. And I further speculate that the masculine ideal came from their neighbors, the Fire Giants. So when crafting a man to appeal to Rennala's tastes, Marika had to create an appearance reminiscent of the Fire Giants, sporting their signature hair color. The description of the first war seems to highlight both that Radagon is alluring, and just what's alluring about him. Radagon's glory burns red as his hair. Once Radagon was part of the Carian family, he used this access to learn all he could of sorcery. He also had some kids with Rennala, powerful ones too. The Mask of Confidence item description says Radagon had a particular need for privacy, which I think covers up whatever magic Marika used to have children with Rennala. Of these, I find Radon in particular to be interesting. It sounds like Marika, as Radagon, practically raised Radon as if he were part of the Leyndell royal family. He idolized Godfrey, Marika's husband and then Elden Lord, and I imagine Marika and Godfrey would raise their sons to do just that. Radon would go on to achieve the astonishing feat of holding back the stars in the sky. Why would he do this? I think it benefits Leyndell, so it was probably encouraged by Marika. No matter how powerful the Golden Order is in the lands between, something could always fall from space and change everything. That's how the Elden Beast got there in the first place. For another example, just look what happened to Farum Azula. So keeping space stuff from meddling in terrestrial affairs seems like it would only help secure the Golden Order status quo. But anyway, that's fish from a different kettle. Eventually, Marika had learned all she could in her Radagon guise and was set to return to Leyndell. After this point, her scheming began to bear fruit. By taking a scholarly approach to Golden Faith, Marika/Radagon created Golden Order fundamentalism, further exploiting all capabilities available to her and her followers. She'd made good on her intent to search the depths of the Golden Order, gaining new power just as intended. She'd also developed a deeper knowledge of the proper path. In other words, fundamentalism. But when Marika decided to abandon Rennala, Radagon first began to majorly diverge from Marika. This is the primary point of speculation in my theory. Radagon was just an act that Marika had been putting on, but unbeknownst to her, the separate personality she'd created took on a life of its own. It was hard to tell for a long time, because Marika and Radagon's intents were so closely aligned. Radagon was a devoted husband, father, and scholar. That's exactly what Marika needed him to be. So Marika couldn't even tell whether Radagon was making his own choices, or whether Marika was just playing this part she'd invented. But while Marika had no true devotion to Rennala, Radagon did. Basically, when Marika had Radagon leave Rennala the way she did, she finally made Radagon break character. I believe Radagon, exercising volition distinct from Marika's, left Rennala an extremely potent parting gift. He did this out of genuine attachment. He left her a huge amber egg, which also contains a great rune, a piece of the Elden Ring itself. The ability to grant a boon like this is beyond the powers of anyone but Marika, or in this case, a different persona wielding Marika's abilities. But Marika didn't necessarily realize this until much later. The lack of the Great Rune of the Unborn within her may have been the cause of Malenia and Miquella's inborn afflictions. Of course, you should be skeptical of the idea of a false personality taking on his own life. This is certainly the most finicky part of the theory. I will give what justification for it that I can. I do want to say up front that the whole Marika-Radagon puzzle seems to require a bizarre leap of one kind or another to explain everything. Basically, at some point, they need to either split or merge, and I don't know how either of those could ever be explained without it being a bit hard to swallow. So unless someone has a truly magnificent idea to put forward, I think this needs to be graded on a curve. So how could a false persona possibly take on its own personhood? First of all, Marika is literally a god. So, if only on a thematic level, it does make sense that her very ideas would spontaneously turn into reality. But also, interestingly, part of the marriage ceremony to Rennala was cleansing Radagon with the Celestial Dew. This dew reverses antagonizations and relates to the idea of guiding fate. But unsurprisingly, it couldn't change the mind of the goddess Marika, an incredibly powerful being and under the light of the Erd Tree no less. Marika retained her hostility, or at least lethal indifference, toward Rennala. But Marika was pretending to be a different person who, among other things, did renounce hostility toward Rennala and formed a true bond with her. So rather than change Marika's own hostility, the Celestial Dew reified this false Radagon persona of hers, splintering him off and giving him his own fate. Ultimately, Radagon's religious devotion was his overriding motivation. He did indeed leave Rennala, become Elden Lord, and develop Golden Order fundamentalism. He truly was the Leal Hound. But his bond with Rennala was genuine, so he'd left her a grand token of regret, a parting gift far beyond anything Marika would have ever done. Bequeathing a great rune like this would seem to require Marika's power. So to explain how it could have happened, I say this was done by Radagon before Marika even realized he had his own will at all. Just how Marika and Radagon's relationship evolved from then on is not something I have a very firm proposal for just yet. Clearly it does seem that Radagon remained fanatically devoted to the Golden Order, while Marika seemed to have lost faith completely. Any attempt to comprehend the Marika-Radagon mystery has to contend with that brutally confusing echo of Marika from the Queen's bedchamber. O Radagon, Leal Hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me, thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered both, mine other self. First off, I do think that referring to a separate personality which took on a life of its own as mine other self sounds completely fitting. But what's this about Radagon not yet becoming Marika? I'd guess this probably has to do with Radagon increasingly becoming the dominant personality in control of Marika's body and abilities. Considering Radagon's level of devotion, this sounds greater will sanctioned. It could also be taken as narratively re-emphasizing the concept of Marika losing all agency over time, becoming merely a limb of an outer god, despite wielding enormous power. But she does seem to say that Radagon will eventually take over her position, and presumably her public persona as well, just like she used to play his part. She promises a shattering as well. By now she likely has no love left for the Golden Order, whose interests Radagon would only advance once he takes control. Instead, while she still has power, she ruins them both by shattering the Elden Ring. This harms both the Golden Order as well as her and Radagon's shared body. I wonder if she actually shattered the Elden Ring in part because she knew she would be punished as a result. The punishment is bodily, so it restricts both herself and also Radagon. I wonder if restricting Radagon like this was a major motivation for her. If she can't control her own body, no one can. As promised, both were shattered. The timeline on Marika's intents is fairly slippery, however. In the echo in which she seems to bid goodbye to Godfrey and the Tarnished, she's already talking about them coming back and seemingly becoming Elden Lord. So it seems she had some such plans, or at least contingencies, even back then. But as I said, I haven't considered the shattering itself thoroughly yet. That's not the focus here, it's just an interesting idea. Though, depending on how that shapes up, it could force me to reevaluate this Marika/Radagon theory. Any related uncertainty is a potential weak point. What are some other weak points? As I said, all this stuff about mountaintop culture and Radagon's red hair is super speculative. I do think it helps a few minor pieces slide into a convenient place, but even if it's not correct, it's not critical to the central idea. Regardless of why Marika chose Radagon's appearance how she did, she could still have created this illusion with the intent of marrying Rennala. Part of my reasoning attempts to explain the structure of the two Liurnian wars, but other explanations could be possible. I find it unlikely that Leyndell's forces were so easily held off, but maybe the Golden Order really had lost that much power at that stage. Why didn't Godfrey lead this campaign? Maybe he was at the sagely ruler phase in his career and did not personally participate in wars anymore. But after Leyndell failed to perform in the first war, wouldn't he at least step in for the second war? Or if not that, shouldn't Leyndell be doing something different to try and make the second attempt go better than the first? Well, maybe the idea to marry Radagon to Rennala was cooked up in between the two wars. In other words, maybe Radagon was a real, independent person at that time, and after the first war went poorly, Marika decided to try and sue for peace by starting a second war whose resolution would be this marriage. I'm not sure how she could do that from a position of weakness, but it's still an idea. It would also explain why the actions of a single champion changed Leyndell's whole posture from belligerent to peaceful. You might also question Radagon's devotion to Rennala. He certainly ends up choosing the Golden Order over her. I think this choice is a personal tragedy for him, but other interpretations are possible. The best evidence is the Golden Order Greatsword's item description. He reforged his marriage gift from Rennala into this emblem of the Golden Order, and proudly no less. Depending on how much weight you put on this action, you could see this as a deliberate trampling of his bond with her, so that would make it harder to believe that he was ever all that attached to her at all. But regardless of whether I've properly understood Radagon's motivations, the material facts of the Amber Egg really compel me to believe that Radagon was Marika at the time he bequeathed it. As I've said, since it contains a Great Rune, I think it could only have been given through Marika's power, yet I don't see why she would ever want to do that. Maybe she has some scheme I'm not comprehending. But to me it makes more sense that Radagon must have had access to Marika's full powers even back then, to help explain it. Other theories are possible. For instance, it's not actually clear that Radagon gave the egg to Rennala when he left. Gideon only implies this, but it's not stated. It could have been a wedding gift, for example. And maybe the Great Rune of the Unborn wasn't always in the egg. It's not clear when it got there, nor how. For example, maybe it's Ranni's Great Rune. Gideon mentions both Rennala's rune and Ranni's lack of one, but never relates the two ideas. But maybe he simply doesn't know, or if he does, isn't telling. The description of the Great Rune of the Unborn seems to identify with the egg though. The first line just describes it as the egg itself. It doesn't say something like, such an egg exists. It's just declared, as if to say, this rune is the egg. Which doesn't make a ton of sense to me either, but it does seem to support the idea that the egg and the rune were always deeply tied, which to me seems to require that Radagon had Marika-like power when he gave Rennala this egg. To my mind, this egg is the linchpin of many of Elden Ring's most baffling mysteries, so I'm not claiming I've entirely cracked it, so to speak. But obviously it impinges on the Marika-Radagon puzzle, as I've been prattling on about. It's also probably the biggest chunk of amber found anywhere, so it ties back to the Age of Plenty, when the amber was more freely flowing. What was that like? Why did it stop? What happened next? The egg is used for rebirth, another complex topic, considering all the forms of rebirth and reincarnation found in the Lands Between. It uses silver tier cores, and don't even get me started on all that. And to top it all off, it contains a Great Rune. When the Elden Ring was shattered, how did the various shard bearers first gain their Great Runes? Were they handed out in a deliberate fashion, or did they magically appear to beings that had some affinity for them? And the Great Rune of the Unborn is the only one that doesn't lack benediction when we get it. How does that work? That normally ties back to the two fingers found atop Divine Towers. Two more bizarre singularities of mystery among Elden Ring lore. So as I said, the Amber Egg binds all these mysteries together. The questions pile up higher and higher. Here I'm only giving one small puzzle piece, questionable in various ways, including the fact that it doesn't yet fit into an entire coherent whole. But it's all very interesting, and there's obviously tons to discuss. I think I'll have a lot more to say going forward.